In Manchester, a city where its bustling streets hide both opportunity and peril, something dark has been lurking beneath the surface. A string of brutal knife crimes has rocked the community, leaving families shattered and neighborhoods on edge. What caused these senseless attacks? How did a quiet night suddenly turn deadly? And more importantly, how did the law respond to bring the killers to justice? Stay with us, as we dive deep into the heart of these shocking events, uncovering the twists and turns that led to the horrifying aftermath. Before we dive into this story, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Have you or anyone in your family ever experienced the pain of a knife attack? We know how heavy these moments can be, and we're here, rooting for your safety every step of the way. Stay strong, stay safe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We're all in this together. The triple stabbing in Gorton, August 18, 2024, in the quiet, unsuspecting neighborhood of Gorton, Manchester, a brutal incident took place that shocked the local community. On the evening of August 18, 2024, a tragic triple stabbing left one dead and two others fighting for their lives. But what led to this horrific attack? And what do we know about the suspect who has now been arrested? Let's dive into this disturbing event and try to understand what happened that night. It was around 11:20 p.m. when the call came in. A stabbing had occurred on Barnard Road in Gorton. Emergency services rushed to the scene, but what they found was far worse than anyone could have anticipated. A 43-year-old woman lay lifeless, having been fatally stabbed. Nearby, a 17-year-old girl and a 64-year-old man were clinging to life, both suffering from severe injuries. The atmosphere was tense, as the reality of the situation set in. This wasn't some random attack, it was personal. The woman who tragically lost her life that night was 43 years old. While we don't know much about her life yet, her death left behind a hole in the hearts of those who loved her. The 17-year-old girl and the 64-year-old man, both injured, were rushed to the hospital, where their lives hung in the balance. It's hard to imagine the pain and fear they must have felt in those moments, knowing that someone close to them could be behind such a brutal act. Soon after the stabbing, a 22-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of murder. He was known to the victims, which suggests that this was not a random attack, but a deeply personal one. The police treated the incident as an isolated domestic case, confirming that there was no wider threat to the public. But who was this man? And why would someone so close to the victims carry out such a horrific act? Those answers remain locked away as the investigation continues. The police quickly took control of the situation, but the questions remained. Why had this happened? What led to this violent outburst? Was it the result of a long-standing issue, or was it something that happened in the heat of the moment? For now, the investigation is ongoing. The authorities are piecing together the details and trying to understand what pushed this suspect to commit such a brutal crime. For the community in Gorton, this tragic event has left many reeling. People in the area were shocked to hear about the attack, and as the investigation unfolds, there's a sense of disbelief. Gorton, a place where families lived side by side, had been shaken to its core. As for the victims, our hearts go out to them and their families. The woman who lost her life, the young girl, and the elderly man, they all deserve justice. Their lives have been forever changed by one person's actions. The arrest of the 22-year-old man has brought some closure to this horrific event, but the pain for the victims' families will never go away. What caused this man to snap and take the lives of those he was once close to? The answers may never be fully known. But one thing is certain, this was a senseless tragedy. A reminder of the fragility of life and the violence that can sometimes arise from unexpected places. And as always, we'll keep you updated on the investigation as more details come to light. The Moss Side Gang feud stabbing, July 26, 2020, in the heart of Moss Side, Manchester, violence erupted one summer evening in 2020, leading to a tragic loss of life. On July 26, 17-year-old Mohammed was fatally stabbed during a gang-related altercation between two rival groups. The Rusholme Crips and the AO, Active Only, gang. What happened that night? And what led to the deadly feud that cost a young life? Let's explore the events surrounding this senseless act of violence. It was a hot summer night in Mudz when the streets became a battleground. The tension between the Rusholme Crips and the AO gang had been simmering for months, with disputes escalating into violence. This wasn't just a random clash. The feud was rooted in years of territorial struggles and personal animosities, spilling over into the streets and causing chaos. On that fateful evening, the situation reached a deadly tipping point. During the altercation, Mohammed, just 17 years old, was fatally stabbed. A young life, full of potential, snuffed out in an instant, leaving his family and community devastated. Mohammed was a teenager with a future ahead of him, but his life was tragically cut short due to the violent gang culture that had overtaken parts of Manchester. While he was involved in the altercation, the question remains, what led him to be caught up in this dangerous world? His family and friends were left heartbroken, not just by the loss of Mohammed, but by the fact that his death was the result of a senseless gang rivalry. In the aftermath, the community mourned the death of a young man who had so much more to offer. The Rusholme Crips and the AO gang were no strangers to violence. For years, their rivalry had been a source of constant tension in the area. But it wasn't just about territory or control, it was also about status, power, and the constant need to assert dominance. This altercation wasn't an isolated incident. The ongoing feud between these two gangs had been simmering for months, with threats and violence taking place on both sides. To make matters worse, gang-affiliated music videos began to glorify the violence, fueling the tensions even further. After the stabbing, police launched an extensive investigation into the events surrounding Mohammed's death. 4 individuals were eventually convicted of manslaughter in connection with the incident. Their actions that night resulted in a senseless loss of life, but the question still remains, what could have been done to prevent this tragedy? While the authorities were able to bring some form of justice to Mohammed's family, the larger issue of gang violence in Manchester continues. These groups are fueled by an ongoing cycle of retaliation and revenge, and the consequences of this culture continue to ripple through the community. The death of Mohammed sent shockwaves through Mudz, but it also raised awareness about the devastating impact of gang culture. The ongoing feud between the Rusholme Crips and AO gang had claimed another victim, but how many more lives would be lost before the violence stopped? For Mohammed's family, the pain will never fade. A young life taken too soon, a senseless tragedy that could have been avoided. And while justice has been served, the real work of breaking the cycle of violence in these communities remains to be done. The death of Mohammed serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of gang culture. It's a reminder that behind every headline, behind every violent altercation, there are real people, families, and communities affected. This tragedy, though marked by convictions, will never erase the pain felt by those who loved Mohammed. As we reflect on the events that led to his death, we must ask ourselves, what needs to change in order to stop this from happening again? The answers may not be simple, but they are necessary. The Mudz Hospital clash, April 2004. In April 2004, an event took place that shocked both the local community and the wider public. What should have been a place of healing turned into a scene of chaos and violence. At Manchester Royal Infirmary, a confrontation erupted between two notorious gangs. The Gooch Gang and the Longside crew, following a shooting incident in Mudz. What happened that day? And how did a hospital become the backdrop for such a violent clash? It all began earlier in the day when a shooting took place in the Mudz area. The victim, a member of the Longside crew, was rushed to Manchester Royal Infirmary for treatment. The hospital, a place where patients should feel safe, was soon thrust into the middle of a gang war. As the injured man was brought into the emergency department, the tensions between the Gooch Gang and Longsight crew were about to reach a breaking point. As word spread that a member of the Longsight crew was at the hospital, members of the Gooch Gang showed up, ready for a confrontation. What happened next was like something out of a movie. A violent clash erupted in the emergency department, with both sides armed and ready for a fight. Weapons were drawn, and chaos ensued. The emergency department, usually a place of calm and care, turned into a war zone. Medical staff were forced to take cover as the fight spilled over into the corridors. The hospital went into lockdown, with police quickly arriving to restore order. But by then, the damage had been done. The violence left many in shock, as a place of healing became a battleground. The confrontation between the Gooch Gang and Longsight crew was a stark reminder of the ongoing gang violence that had plagued parts of Manchester for years. In the immediate aftermath, 10 individuals were arrested for affray and public order offences. But the question remained, how did we get here? How did two rival gangs come to clash in a hospital, of all places? The answer lies in years of rivalry and violence between these groups, fueled by power struggles, retaliation, and the dangerous culture of gang warfare that had taken root in the city. The Gooch Gang and the Longsight crew had been at odds for years, battling for control of territory, influence, and status. Their rivalry was well known, and it was only a matter of time before their violent conflict spilled over into public spaces. The clash at Manchester Royal Infirmary was a symbol of the ongoing war between these two groups, with innocent bystanders, such as the hospital staff and patients, caught in the crossfire. But the most disturbing aspect of this incident wasn't just the violence, it was the sense of entitlement and impunity displayed by the gang members. They weren't afraid to bring their fight into the public eye, disregarding the safety and well-being of everyone around them. For the hospital staff, it was a terrifying and unpredictable situation. What should have been a routine day turned into a crisis. The lockdown and police intervention helped prevent further violence, but the lasting impact of the clash was felt throughout the community. The 10 individuals arrested faced charges for their involvement, but the question remains, what more could be done to prevent these kinds of incidents from happening? And how can the cycle of gang violence be broken? The Moss Side Hospital clash in April 2004 serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers of gang culture and the violence that can erupt in even the most unexpected places. What was supposed to be a sanctuary for the injured became the site of chaos and destruction. For those involved, justice was pursued, but the underlying issue, the tension between these gangs, remained. And until that issue is addressed, it's likely that we will continue to see similar clashes in the future. Thank you for joining us in revisiting this shocking chapter of Moss Side's history. We'll keep you updated with any further developments on this case. The Moss Side stabbing of Abdulwahab Hafidah, May 12, 2016. On May 12, 2016, a violent and shocking attack unfolded in the streets of Moss Side, Manchester, leaving the community reeling. 18-year-old Abdulwahab Hafidah, a young man with his whole life ahead of him, was chased down and fatally stabbed in broad daylight. But this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a carefully orchestrated act of revenge, deeply rooted in the dangerous world of gang rivalries. This is the story of Abdulwahab's final moments, and the brutal gang violence that led to his death. It was a busy day in Moss Side when Abdulwahab Hafidah found himself at the center of a deadly chase. Reports describe it as a pack chase, where a group of up to 10 individuals, all from the AO gang, relentlessly pursued Abdulwahab down a busy road. In the chaos of the moment, people watched as Abdulwahab sprinted for his life, hoping to escape his pursuers. But there was no escaping the violence that awaited him. Cornered and overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers, Abdulwahab was brutally stabbed. The attack, carried out in public, was fast, merciless, and intentional. A group bent on delivering a painful message through violence. Abdulwahab Hafidah was only 18 years old when he lost his life. He was just beginning to carve out a future for himself, a young man full of potential. But that future was stolen from him when a group of gang members turned the streets of Moss Side into a hunting ground. To those who knew him, Abdulwahab wasn't just a statistic. He was a son, a brother, and a friend. His death left a hole in the hearts of his family, who now had to grapple with the harsh reality that gang violence had taken their loved one. The attack on Abdulwahab was no random act of violence. It was part of an ongoing gang rivalry, a dangerous game of retaliation between the AO gang and their rivals. The details of the feud were complex. Territory, reputation, and personal scores all played a role in the deadly game. Abdulwahab's death was a revenge killing, one that had been a long time coming. In gang culture, retaliation is a constant cycle, and once violence begins, it's almost impossible to break. This wasn't the first attack between these groups, and it wouldn't be the last. For Abdulwahab, however, it was the final chapter, a tragic reminder of the deadly cost of gang life. As police launched their investigation into Abdulwahab's death, they faced the daunting task of untangling the complex web of gang affiliations and motivations. What led to the attack on Abdulwahab? Was he targeted because of something he had done, or was he just in the wrong place at the wrong time? With the gang's members determined to keep their activities hidden, police had to rely on witnesses and evidence to piece together the events that led to that fatal chase. Despite the efforts to investigate, the culture of silence and fear surrounding gangs made it difficult to get to the truth. For Abdulwahab's family and the Moss Side community, the impact of his death was devastating. His life, stolen by a senseless act of violence, left his loved ones searching for answers that may never come. They were left to wonder what could have been done to stop this tragedy before it happened. Could Abdulwahab have been saved from this life of violence? Could the cycle of retaliation have been broken? The attack marked a dark chapter for Moss Side, one that highlighted the extreme lengths some gangs will go to prove their power. But it also highlighted the tragedy of lost lives, young men, like Abdulwahab, who could have had brighter futures if not for the influence of gangs and violence. Abdulwahab Hafidah's story is a reminder of the devastating consequences of gang rivalries. A young life taken too soon, a family left in mourning, and a community forever scarred. His death didn't just end his life, it was a ripple effect that hurt everyone who knew him, and left a deep wound in Moss Side. As we reflect on what happened that day, we must remember Abdulwahab as more than just a victim of gang violence. He was a young man, full of promise, who deserved better. And we must ask ourselves, what can be done to prevent these senseless acts of violence from claiming more young lives in the future? The Moss Side stabbing of Ahmed Mohammed, March 22, 2016. On March 22, 2016, tragedy struck the streets of Moss Side when 20-year-old Ahmed, Mudz, Mohammed was fatally stabbed on Crondall Street. His death wasn't just another random act of violence. It was the result of escalating gang warfare between the AO and Doddington gangs, marking a dark chapter in the history of gang violence in the area. What led to Ahmed's death, and how did gang tensions explode in such a tragic way? Let's take a deeper look at the events that unfolded that day and the impact it had on the Moss Side community. It was a typical evening in Moss Side when Ahmed Mohammed, also known as Mudz, found himself caught in a violent altercation. On Crondall Street, an area known for its troubled past, Ahmed was stabbed in what witnesses described as a swift and brutal attack. The group responsible for his death was reportedly affiliated with the Doddington gang, and it's believed that this attack was a retaliation linked to the ongoing tensions between the AO and Doddington gangs. The scene was chaotic, with residents hearing the commotion but not knowing the full scale of the violence until it was too late. Ahmed's death was not just another tragic loss, it was a resurgence of the gang violence that had plagued Moss Side for years. Ahmed, Mudz, Mohammed was only 20 years old when his life was taken. He was a young man with so much ahead of him, but that promise was shattered by gang violence. He was known to those who loved him as a son, a brother, and a friend. His murder left his family and the local community devastated. It wasn't just the loss of Ahmed that cut deep, but the reminder that young people, like him, were often sucked into the dangerous world of gangs, where violence was the only language spoken. The violence that took Ahmed's life was rooted in the bitter rivalry between the AO gang and the Doddington crew. For years, these two gangs had fought for control of territory, influence, and respect. The gangs' conflict had been escalating, with retaliatory attacks becoming more frequent and more violent. Ahmed's death was one such retaliation, an act of vengeance that wasn't just about personal grievances, but about maintaining power within the gang landscape of Mudz. This wasn't a one-off. It was part of an ongoing battle that seemed to have no end in sight, with more young lives at risk. After Ahmed's stabbing, police worked quickly to investigate the circumstances of his death. But the investigation was complicated by the notorious silence surrounding gang activity. Witnesses were often too afraid to speak, and many of the people involved in the gangs refused to cooperate with the authorities. Despite these challenges, police were able to gather enough evidence to link Ahmed's murder to the ongoing tensions between the AO and Doddington gangs. The violence had not only claimed his life, but it had also sent shockwaves through the local community, which was once again caught in the crossfire of a war between young men vying for control. The murder of Mohammed was a turning point for Mudz. It signified the resurgence of gang violence in the area, and the community felt its impact deeply. For many, it was another grim reminder of the dangers that lurked on the streets. The gangs, once seen as a distant problem, had now become a very real threat to the lives of young people, and Ahmed's death was just the latest tragedy in a long list of victims. For Ahmed's family, the pain of losing their son was compounded by the realization that his death had been driven by forces beyond their control. They were left asking why their son had to be caught in the middle of a gang war that had no regard for the value of life. The death of Mohammed was another senseless act of violence that claimed the life of a young man with so much potential. It was a violent and unnecessary end to a life that could have been so much more. His death didn't just affect his family, it affected the whole community of Mudz. And as the rivalry between the AO and Doddington gangs continues to fuel violence in the area, the question remains, how many more lives will be lost before this cycle of retaliation ends? As we reflect on the tragedy of Ahmed's death, we must continue to ask ourselves, what can we do to break the cycle of violence and prevent further tragedies like this one? If you've been moved by this story, remember that we can all play a part in ending the violence that tears families apart. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe. This is just one chapter in the ongoing struggle against gang violence, and there are more stories, more lives lost, more families shattered, that need to be heard. Make sure you subscribe and share this video to raise awareness and to keep these stories alive. We'll be bringing you more true crime tales, shining a light on the dark corners of our society. Thank you for watching, and stay safe. More stories are coming soon.